Yeah, I'm not a. I want to start off just by saying I'm not a cloud microphysicist. I'm just a forecaster at the National Weather Service Amarillo office, so I know enough to know when it's going to snow versus rain, or at least I hope to know that. But I want to really thank especially my co-authors, but especially Justin Jackson there. He's now at the National Weather Service in Nashville. Him and I spent fair amount of time on this, but it's still kind of in its infancy, so definitely interested in seeing some of the comments from maybe some more experienced cloud microphysicists. So what happened is we had a plant-induced, is what we kind of called it, or factory-induced snowfall, where didn't have any other snowfall in our area, but downstream of power plants and factories, we had these plumes of snow, almost similar to lake effect looking kind of snow. And when we had it, we were working midnight shifts, and it was kind of difficult to know what to do from a forecast standpoint because they shut off the plants, the snow stops. So it's totally different than what we're used to. But so we started looking back at different events that we had, or to see if there were many events, and there are really only a couple documented events. We know there's been power plant flurries and factory flurries before, but the only two documented events that we could find with actual accumulations were Green Bay, Wisconsin, about 16 years ago, and then a couple years ago, a little place called Shippingport, Pennsylvania, downstream of a nuclear power plant. That one actually produced up to about 3.5 inches of snow, which went over an interstate and caused some issues. So just real briefly going back through those events, some of the meteorological factors, the biggest thing to note is these strong low-level inversions and lack of low-level wind and wind shear. We noticed that with all the events. And then the dendritic growth zone within the snow growth zone within that surface layer, that sub-inversion layer. And so that was the Green Bay one. The Shippingport one, if you look at the sub-inversion layer, it's a little different. It's got more of a steeper low-level lapse rates, and it's a deeper inversion up to about 850 millibars, and not quite as moist. But we'll talk a little bit more about some of those differences and how they affected probably the amounts out of some of these events. And then here was our event, and you can see that steep low-level lapse rates beneath an incredibly sharp inversion there. Pretty anomalously cold pattern for us in West Texas, or in the Panhandle. So just a brief outline, the event started around 14Z Sunday, really picked up in earnest Sunday night, and then didn't end until Monday night, so almost 2 days of flurries off and on, or heavy snow at times. And the rest of the panhandles were seeing low clouds, freezing fog, things like that, but the only places where snow was falling was downstream from these power plants. So just a real brief synoptic setup, just northwest flow, nothing earth-shattering, I guess is what I was getting at with this. No big upper low or anything like that you would think is going to cause a whole lot of precipitation. So here's the radar image. We're looking in this yellow circle, and you can kind of see very weak evidence of a plume coming from the factory here, southwest of Borger, and this is where we're going to kind of keep our eyes on. And that it started off Sunday morning, and then this is going into Sunday afternoon. I apologize for not having the times on here. And then it kind of died off Sunday afternoon, and then it really picked back up Sunday night, and that was as our boundary layer cooled a little more. And if you watch right there, it switched. We had two different factories, and one quit producing and the other started producing. So it was really interesting, from a forecaster standpoint. It's like, what are you going to do, call the factories and say, hey, are you guys going to, start doing anything? So it's really difficult to forecast. And as you can see, it really kind of flared up there. And you can look down here south of Amarillo, right at the tail end. We ended up with a second band down there off of a coal fire power plant. So I think a lot of people in this room probably don't really need this, but just a real quick primer, for ice nuclei activation temperatures. A lot of times what we're looking for in the Midwest and in the high plains is at least -7, -8, and anyone, if they found different, can kind of correct me, but a lot of times 9, 10, 11 below before you really start to get heterogeneous nucleation. And so with that in mind, we go into these soundings. This is the prefrontal sounding right before the front came through on that Sunday morning. And then as you see, the front comes through and we start to cool off. But interestingly, the dendritic growth zone, where we would expect a really good chance of heterogeneous nucleation and snow crystals and snowfall, we still were not in that layer yet by Sunday evening. And so if you remember, we didn't have a whole lot of snow on Sunday, and then it just took off Sunday night. And we surmise the reason it took off is because we finally cooled down into the dendritic growth zone, and all that freezing fog, and we had a little bit of mist and freezing drizzle and deposition all over all of our trees and everything else. all of a sudden turned into snow. And we think that it's mainly because the boundary layer cooled to where we could get heterogeneous nucleation. And then we actually released a special sounding. I hope that you think that's worth the government's money, but we thought it was kind of cool enough. We tried to release it right up into one of the plumes, but we missed. But you can see even at 18Z Monday, we still were plenty cold. And then if we go to 0Z Tuesday, remember the event ends Tuesday evening, you can see us warming out of the snow growth layer, and that's when the event quickly ceased, was once we started getting the return flow and warming up a little bit. In Borger, here are the two plants. The northern plant is a carbon black plant. And, the study's a little bit in its infancy, so did a little research trying to find exactly what the emissions consisted of through EPA and things like that, but hopefully more on that to come, because we do kind of want to know what the particulates were, and maybe if they did have an activation temperature a little bit warmer than what we would normally expect with some of the normal particulates and ice nuclei. And then here's that fertilizer plant, which fertilizer plants in Texas are kind of infamous. So I guess this one at least only, produced snow. But and then some of these areas were actually hit both times with those snow bands from both of them. I talked mainly about the Borger event. We ended up right at the tail end. Interestingly, on Monday morning, when all the stores and everything in Amarillo were turning all their lights on, the peak power demand from 7 to 11 a.m. Monday morning really. That combined with the boundary layer cooling into the dendritic growth zone, we were just focused on Borger, and all of a sudden we look out the window, and I mean, it's just snowing like crazy. And the roads, and we got 3 inches of snow in about 6 hours in Amarillo. Not quite as prolific as the Borger event, but some really cool satellite images. And anyone that's from a lake effect area like I am originally, these images are all too familiar. Dry on one side of town, and it's just a snowy mess on the other side. So this is kind of a cool visible satellite image of that Amarillo event. You can see this plume. I mean, it's clear skies. We have no signs of precipitation anywhere else, no synoptic forcing, and all of a sudden you get this big plume form when the power plant kicks on in high gear on Monday morning. And so the next day we went and looked at the MODIS true color images to see if we could see where the snow actually fell, and luckily the clouds cleared out just in time, and you can see these two kind of distinct bands from the two factories up there in Borger, and it was really pretty interesting to see that. And from reports that we got about 3 to 5 inches in those bands, which from all the research we can do is the most that have ever been reported out of a power plant induced or a factory, anthropogenic induced snowfall localized event like this. So just real briefly, some operational recommendations for the forecasters out here that might be in the Weather Service, or just for your general interest. We sat there on a midnight shift, and we found out that it was happening about midnight via social media. Someone posted some pictures of the snow and stuff like that, and so we were like, well, what do we do? I mean, it's going over the highways, it's affecting people, but I mean, do we issue a 2-county advisory for this? And we talked a lot about it, and we decided to go ahead and issue an advisory. And then so I captured the Wawa map when we did that, and it just looked hilarious. It's like, oh, what's Amarillo smoking over there? And so then when the Amarillo, the Borger one's going on and the Amarillo one goes on, and we have to expand the advisory. And then actually we ended up getting Lubbock into the game there at CWA when the event went further south. So we're like, hey, thanks guys. Now maybe people won't think we're quite so crazy, but it was really a tough operational, because if they just shut off the factory like that northern one, then people are like, why'd you issue an advisory? So it was kind of an interesting event, and we went ahead and just owned it. I guess we kind of had some conversation, and we said these people are going to figure it out. I mean, you got these gigantic plumes going up and snow falling downstream, so we went ahead, went out on social media, even in our products, and said this is power plant induced snow. It's going to be very localized. You'll be driving through. Did a lot of lake effect wording. You might be driving on a clear road, and then boom, quarter-mile visibilities and snow-packed roadways. And it actually went over pretty well. We tried to beat the conspiracy theorists to the punch, is what we tried to do. So, and here's just a few pictures from the event. And so obviously you can see, there were some impacts, and that was a tough part for us operationally. And that's all I have.
Today, the Northeast is bracing for another winter weather nightmare. Adding insult to injury, many are already buried, with this now the 4th straight weekend storm. Some 35 million people are under a winter weather advisory this morning, and this storm will not only bring snow, but also dangerously cold wind chills with hurricane-force winds. Gusts of 40 to 50 miles per hour in New York and Philadelphia, 50 to 60 in coastal Maine, 60 to 75 on Nantucket. Driving will be treacherous, power outages are likely, and it will test already stretched snow removal crews.
We expect that we will move literally millions of tons of snow over the course of the last few days and the next few days.
The Boston area has seen some of the worst of it. This could be the first time the city has been hit by two blizzards in the same winter. Another foot of snow adding to the more than 42 inches in the past 2 weeks, on track to what could be the snowiest winter ever.
This is probably by far the worst I've seen it.
And people around here are really trying to clean up what they can now, because this time tomorrow we are going to see whiteout blizzard conditions.